Thank you for joining. We will begin in just a moment. We just want to give everyone a little time to jump on. Thank you all for joining. And we have a lot to share tonight, so let's go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for tonight's webinar as we discuss genetic dilated cardiomyopathy, insights, research, and 2026 clinical trials. My name is Nikki Butler, and I'm the Director of Digital and Social Media for the Dilated Cardiomyopathy Foundation and the Genetic Cardiomyopathy Awareness Consortium. We're so glad that you can be with us as we discuss genetic DCM. We have nearly 400 registrants for this insightful discussion. And next slide. And actually one more. So a few housekeeping items. All attendee microphones are on mute upon joining so that you can hear our presenters. Please enter your questions into the Q&A feature of Zoom at any time. There will be a dedicated Q&A session following tonight's presentation. And next slide, we do have a poll for tonight. So Justine, if you could push forward poll number 1. We'd love to know who's attending tonight's webinar. Are you best described as a cardiomyopathy patient, a family member or friend, a medical professional, or an industry professional? Nice to have you all here. And it looks like we have about 61% cardiomyopathy patients, 13% family member or friend, 19% medical professional, and 7% industry professional. And let's keep rolling. I do want you to know that this webinar is being recorded and it will be posted on our YouTube channel following tonight's discussion. As registrants, you will receive an email with a link to the recording. Our YouTube channel also houses a library of our previous webinar recordings. And using the auto translate feature, these videos are available in 54 different languages. And next slide. To begin, I'd like to give you a little background. The DCM Foundation, focused on dilated cardiomyopathy, created the Genetic Cardiomyopathy Awareness Consortium, or GCAC, in 2023. This effort began in 2022 when the DCM Foundation recognized a major gap. Genetics in cardiomyopathy wasn't being widely discussed, not by medical professionals and certainly not by patients. And we realized something important. You can't talk about genetic cardiomyopathy in silos. Many gene mutations cross diagnostic boundaries. For example, a single gene variant might cause dilated cardiomyopathy, DCM, in one person, and arrhythmogenic cardiomyopathy, ACM, in another. Because of that overlap, we needed a broader, more inclusive approach. So GCAC was formed to raise awareness and provide education about genetics and cardiomyopathy across all types. Next slide. In just a few years, we've made meaningful progress. Awareness of genetics and cardiomyopathy has increased significantly, both in the medical community and among patients. When we launched GCAC, we started with 8 patient groups, and today we've grown to 11, and we're continuing to expand. This momentum shows that there's a real need and real interest in understanding the genetic side of cardiomyopathy. Next slide. These are the 11 patient groups that are participating in the Genetic Cardiomyopathy Awareness Consortium. We want to thank each group for participating. It's incredible to have a coalition of 11 different groups working together to solve a real problem with patients. And next slide. Our Executive Director, Greg Roof, will join us a bit later in the presentation. To kick things off, I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Neal Lakdawala, Assistant Professor of Medicine at Harvard Medical School and a cardiovascular genetic specialist at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston. Dr. Lakdawala is internationally recognized for his research on the genetic causes of cardiomyopathies, the natural history of these conditions, and clinical trials in this rapidly evolving space. We're grateful to have your expertise, Dr. Lakdawala. And I'll turn this over to you.
Thank you, Nikki, and welcome everyone. So my first presentation today is a pretty macro, high-level view of why genetics matter in dilated cardiomyopathy. And I apologize for many on this call who already know that it matters and are really most interested in the disease gene-specific content and development, and know that that content is out there. And I know that Nikki and Greg and the DCM Foundation have put a lot of that on their website. But this is more of an overview. So next slide, please. So this is what we'll cover today. We'll touch on dilated cardiomyopathy, and at least from a clinician standpoint, how we define it, what we consider it, and how we recognize the role of familial disease, which genes are important for dilated cardiomyopathy, how knowing a genetic cause already has major implications for how your care should move forward, and treatment decisions that you and your provider will make. And I'll touch briefly on the horizon, but really Greg is going to cover the rise of precision therapies that are really exciting development for our field. Next slide, please. So dilated cardiomyopathy, what is it? So your heart is at some level just a dumb, simple organ. It just pumps blood, and because of valves, it pumps it in the right direction. In dilated cardiomyopathy, the problem fundamentally is that it doesn't pump blood forward as well. It becomes enlarged, we think, as a compensatory mechanism, but the fundamental problem is weakness in the muscle. And lots of different analogies are used, but one is that it continues to enlarge and change in shape a little bit like a balloon, changing from a football shape to more of a basketball shape as it progresses. The population statistics for dilated cardiomyopathy for DCM aren't great, meaning that we don't have wonderful data on the frequency of DCM in the general population. Current estimates are that up to 1 in 250 people have this disease. But I'm a card-carrying heart transplant, heart failure doctor, and I know that this disease matters. And a lot of my motivation for being involved in this space is that almost half of people who need a heart transplant need it because of DCM. And it ends up being the most common reason people need a heart transplant. We know from studies that have taken place over the last now 35 years that DCM is genetic in up to 40% of cases. Next slide, please. When we put it against other genetic or other causes of DCM, and you include gene elusive but still clearly hereditary causes, I think genetic etiologies or genetic causes are the most frequent cause of DCM. And that's at least when people undergo genetic testing. Often people are just labeled as idiopathic, which is our language for unknown. And that number ends up being more common in the general population if you don't do genetic testing. There are other causes of DCM that aren't related to genetics, although these other causes may actually conspire with an underlying genetic etiology and sometimes masquerade as an alternate cause. So we know, for instance, that DSP and maybe filament C related DCM may be characterized by inflammation. And so people are told they have myocarditis, which is true, but the underlying genetic etiology or cause might be missed. People who need certain types of chemotherapy, often for lymphoma or breast cancer, may develop cardiomyopathy. We know that, for instance, people who have Titin gene variants are much more likely to develop cardiomyopathy in that context. Alcohol overuse also could cause cardiomyopathy. Peripartum or cardiomyopathy that develops around the time of pregnancy, the last trimester and 6 months after, is a recognized cause of DCM. But again, genetic causes can hide or actually predispose to PPCM or peripartum cardiomyopathy. Why does it matter? Why does it matter that we categorize people into these different bins. And I think it matters for several reasons. One is that the prognosis differs by the underlying cause. And so if you want to know how is this going to play out, knowing the underlying cause is helpful. It matters because if we can identify genetic cause, that has major ramifications to not just our patients, but to their family members. And increasingly, treatment decisions are being made based on the underlying cause, and I'll get into that more. And while genetic testing is woefully underused, in current estimates that only about 1% of people with DCM get genetic testing in the US, we should be pushing for it because these can guide decisions that your providers will make with you regarding your care. Next slide, please. And so even though best studies would suggest that up to 40% of cases are DCM, are hereditary, 40% of DCM cases are hereditary. Often, if you go looking at clinics where patients are treated for DCM, they're very infrequently recognized as having familial disease. And this is because we just don't look right. Recent studies have shown that if we just put together a careful family tree, we put together a pedigree that includes both the generation above and below a patient, and ask pointed questions about at-risk family members, that will learn that 25% of so-called idiopathic or unknown or unexplained DCM is actually familial. I think this is happening in most good heart failure and cardiology practices, and this is endorsed by our professional societies like the American Heart Association or the Heart Failure Society of America. But what we really need to be aiming for is not just asking about family members, but screening family members and screening them with a clinical visit with a cardiologist that includes an echocardiogram or a cardiac MRI. And if we did that, we'd learn that 40% of people with so-called idiopathic or unexplained DCM actually have familial disease. We aim for this, but there are several obstacles to accomplishing it. And one is that we need you, our patients, to communicate with your family members that this is necessary. And we need health insurers and policymakers to agree that screening is worthwhile. Sometimes it can be limited by insurance coverage. Next slide, please. So why get genetic testing? I've alluded to this, but I think first and foremost, we want to know the cause of DCM. Knowing the cause drives better understanding of the future, the natural history of DCM, and then it can also make some very specific, have very specific ramifications for monitoring and treatment. So while medication choices are largely for the future, we know that there are some decisions around device management that are made today based on a genetic cause. We want to get genetic testing to protect your family. And so for a patient with DCM, it's usually inherited in a manner that it can go from either sex parent to either sex child. It may appear to skip generations, but really what's happening is that the severity of disease can vary. And so in the same exact family with the same exact genetic cause, it can be much worse in one versus another family member. Sometimes that can be predicted based on the gene and the what we know about it, but often it's not. And so having a genetic cause allows us to understand who's truly at risk so we can take steps to monitor them and prevent complications of disease. And I think one of the really compelling reasons to get genetic testing is that we're at the forefront of gene-specific therapies for DCM, and you can't undergo or you can't participate in those studies if you don't know your diagnosis. Next slide, please. So I've included the most common DCM disease genes on this slide. Know that they're not all here. There are other genetic causes that are not included that are important, but just from a numbers perspective, aren't at the top of the list. The top of the list is a giant protein or giant gene called titin. Titin is the biggest gene in the human body. It accounts for, we think, up to 20% of DCM, and it usually presents in adulthood. Men develop it a little bit earlier than women, and men who carry Titin gene mutations are more likely to develop disease than women, we think. That said, we would certainly argue that men and women should be equally screened for disease. I only bring up the sex differences because I think these are insights that may lead us to better understand why some people develop this disease and some don't, and then how we can use that to protect everyone. Titin is important in the molecular motor of the heart. The molecular motor of the heart is called the sarcomere. The sarcomere is made up of many different proteins which have different genes, including the MYH7 gene, which encodes a protein called myosin heavy chain. The other sarcomeric genes, if they are mutated in a way that cause DCM, directly lead to a weaker molecular motor, a weaker sarcomere, and we think that's what drives DCM in these patients. And this is a diagnosis we really want to make because unlike Titin, MYH7 and other sarcomeric causes of DCM can develop really early in life, even in newborns. And so if one of you is diagnosed with MYH7 or another sarcomeric cause of DCM, we'll often recommend that your children be assessed for this at an early age. Lamin gene variants are probably the poster child for why we want to make a genetic diagnosis of DCM. LMNA is a gene that encodes two different proteins that provide structural integrity to the nucleus of the cell. So the nucleus is where all DNA is localized within the cell, and it plays an important role in regulating how genes are expressed, how genes make proteins. And in lamin-related cardiomyopathy, the importance lies or extends beyond DCM, but it includes many electrical problems that I'm going to touch on in subsequent slides. The DSP gene encodes for a protein called desmoplakin. It's part of a group of proteins that bind cells together. That's called the desmosome. For some of you who may have arrhythmogenic right ventricular cardiomyopathy, you'll recognize the importance of the desmosome. And the reason I'm including DSP, a desmosomal protein here, is that it ends up looking more like DCM than ARVC in the majority of patients, over 80% of people who have DSP heart disease. Sometimes we can get a tip-off for DSP heart disease based on seemingly unconnected things like how curly your hair is and how coarse the calluses are on your sole. And about a third of people with DSP heart disease have inflammatory or myocarditis episodes. Almost the converse of Titin, DSP seems to be more severe in women and may present more frequently in women who carry DSP gene mutations compared to men. I've included three other important disease genes here, filament C or FLNC, RBM20, and BAG3, which each account for maybe 1 to 5% of DCM causes. Filament C is much like DSP. There's a lot of ventricular arrhythmia risk and has some of the same imaging features and might also have myocarditis as a feature. RBM20, again, a more arrhythmia risk, and this includes both ventricular and atrial arrhythmias. BAG3 may be more important because it's associated with a more aggressive form of DCM, more likely to progress to advanced heart failure. Next slide, please. So I touched on a lot of this with Titin in the preceding slide. I've included here the age of typical age of onset. You'll see that I used a term here called autosomal dominant to describe the family risk. This is true for most of the DCM disease genes, meaning that it's going to go from either sex parent to either sex child. Titin seems to hide in what we thought we understood. So I'm including pregnancy-related cardiomyopathy. About 1 in 10 women with PPCM actually have a Titin gene variant that is likely at least a culprit, if not a contributor. Alcoholic cardiomyopathy or heavy alcohol use is known to, in and of itself, cause DCM, but Titin plays a role here. And maybe even with early onset atrial fibrillation. So we want to make a genetic diagnosis of Titin-related DCM. One of the maybe silver linings to a Titin diagnosis is that we've learned that most patients with Titin-related DCM respond very well to our conventional heart failure medications, at least initially, and appear to be at risk for developing worsening heart failure over time and really merit careful follow-up. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, Lamon is, I think, the poster child for why we want to make a genetic diagnosis in DCM because of so many of the clinical manifestations that might surprise a cardiologist or a patient if they don't know already of these problems from the family. In particular, LMNA-related cardiomyopathy is associated with a high burden of heart rhythm problems. This includes ventricular arrhythmias, and we have a very unique decision-making process to decide how to prevent people from dying suddenly from ventricular arrhythmias and using a defibrillator. You really need a Lamon diagnosis to know that. Atrial fibrillation, or a heart rhythm abnormality involving the top chambers of the heart, almost universal in Lamon DCM, as is AV blocker, a very slow heart rate in the bottom chambers requiring a pacemaker. There appears to be a very unique risk of stroke when Lamon cardiomyopathy evolves to include atrial fibrillation, likely 5 to 6 times more stroke risk than other DCM plus atrial fibrillation. And this really strongly warrants consideration of using a blood thinner to prevent stroke, and knowing that even brief interruptions in using blood thinners can be dangerous and should be a reason to have a conversation with your cardiologist about this. We think that Lamon-related DCM may progress faster than other genetic causes of DCM to end-stage heart failure, although we've learned that in the right patient, using a special type of pacemaker called a biventricular or a resynchronization device may extend survival. Next slide, please. So I touched on this before. DSP, filament C, and RBM20. These are arrhythmogenic forms of dilated cardiomyopathy each, and like Lamon, they merit special consideration for when a defibrillator should be used to prevent people from dying suddenly. Each one of these, in a way that supersedes what we normally do in the care of a patient with DCM. So I'll just say it again. If you know you have this genetic cause, it's going to help your cardiologist make decisions alongside you for how we can prevent cardiac arrest. Sometimes we think we had it figured out, like DSP looking like myocarditis. In the case of RBM20, we're getting to the point that even the very specific location of the mutation in that gene can provide special information. So you really need that genetic diagnosis. Next slide, please. So I've included here how we might start using this information today. So, in Titin, we want to do careful follow-up. We want to use the conventional medical therapy. And in each one of these, we want to screen relatives. For Lamon, for DSP, for RBM20, we want to do heart rhythm monitoring and filament C, each one of those four. We want to not just look at the heart muscle, but we want to look at the heart rhythm and think a lot about defibrillators. And in the case of each one of these, we'll have unique decisions for when a defibrillator might be necessary. And that's what ICD stands for. Next slide. So next steps. So I had mentioned earlier that genetic testing is pretty underutilized for DCM, really across the world, but especially in the US. So ask your cardiologist about genetic testing. And the process itself is relatively simple. It's either a blood draw or even just saliva testing. Put together your family tree. So you may not know this, but about 15 years ago, the then Surgeon General declared that Thanksgiving was Family History Day. And it makes sense. It turns out that most of us don't actually know our family history of health all that well. And so start collecting that information. Ask about, if you have DCMS specifically, to understand more about why people died, when they died, whether they had pacemakers, if they had heart failure. This information can be really powerful when communicating with your cardiologist about your needs for genetic testing and who in the family is at risk. If you have genetic testing, share your results with your family member. As a cardiologist who orders a test, I can't contact your family members. That would be ethically problematic for me to go around you. That comes through you. And so you're going to take on a role as a conduit of information. So working with a genetic counselor can help you speak the right language. And then you can then connect your family members with your treatment team so they can pursue genetic testing as well. And meeting a genetic counselor is really helpful with that. I say no extra charge, but there's a charge with seeing providers. So I don't want to make it seem like you can just call up a genetic counselor for free in all cases, although I know that there are a lot of efforts to make genetic counseling more widely available. But they can play a really fundamental role in helping you to navigate this landscape. And while we're talking a lot about future therapies, know that we've spent a lot of time as a field, and many patients' lives have been saved by some of the guideline-directed medical therapy that's already out there. These are your beta blockers, your Entresto, your SGLT2 inhibitors, your mineralocorticoid receptor antagonists. So not time to abandon those. We're just looking at getting better than what those medicines have taken us to. Next slide. Here are my key takeaways. Touched on this, but genetic causes of DCM, about a third of cases. Your gene result is going to be useful for your family and for your treatment plan, and precision therapies are on the way. Next slide. That's my last slide. So I'm going to shift and I'll talk a little bit about dilated cardiomyopathy and arrhythmogenic cardiomyopathy share. Next slide, please. So one thing that many of us have done over the last 30 years to better take care of our patients is to do natural history studies. And that's where we study the course of our patients to understand what are the risk factors or the risk markers for adverse events, for things like heart failure, for atrial fibrillation, for cardiac arrest. But we realized that individually at individual centers, given the rarity of some genetic causes of DCM, we weren't able to have really precise conclusion or make precise prognostications. And so one of the intents of Share is to go big to learn more about dilated cardiomyopathy. Next slide. And our objectives with DCM Share and ACM Share is to understand how genetic background and other factors impact disease experience. Forward, next point. Next. And then we'll use this to improve patient stratification, meaning we can get better at understanding which patients with which disease genes and at what points of their lives need more help, need more medicines, need more devices, and who's going to be okay. Next. And then how do we get from that information to using what we already have and maybe developing new therapies to improve outcomes? Next slide. The idea is to get the right treatment to the right patient at the right time. Next slide. So for Share, we are building on a legacy of doing this in hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. That was an effort that was launched about a decade ago, and you can see the sites that participated in that. So we used that platform, next slide, and launched, next slide. And we made many discoveries using HCM Share. I've just listed 17. We're up to nearly 30 papers now, 30 discoveries that came from that in hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. Next slide. So this gave rise to the launch of Share and for dilated and arrhythmogenic cardiomyopathy. We started in 2022 really talking to our friends and colleagues around the world who took care of other patients with genetic DCM. and tried to build a collaborative scientific engine for progress. And you can see key timelines here. Next slide. So you may or may not find your team's hospital or location here. So we launched Share initially with these sites spanning the US and several sites in Europe and in the UK. Since then, we've added a few key collaborators, including University of California, San Francisco, and then Royal Prince Alfred in Sydney, Australia, and anticipate adding colleagues in Denmark. Next slide. I'm listing here our key collaborators, and we can go through this quickly, but I just want to show you that we've been fortunate to recruit and to collaborate with, I think, international thought leaders, many of whom have helped us make major discoveries in this field. Next slide. Both here and in Europe. Next slide. Next slide. And next slide. Okay, so why do this? So why did we assemble a big cohort and collaborative effort to make discovery in dilated cardiomyopathy? To date, we have recruited nearly 8,000 patients into DCM Share, with a median of about 5 years of follow-up. So that's a lot of information. Next slide. And so the first thing it does is give us scale. So 4,000 to 8,000 patients worth of information. I give that range because not everyone in that group had genetic testing. About 4,000 have. It's multi-center. We're focused on outcomes or events that I think we all care about, and we're constantly monitoring progress for our patients. Next slide. Depth matters. So it's not just knowing a handful of things, but knowing a lot of things about our patients. So we'll have a research tool that I think will serve our scientific community and our patients in many ways. Currently, for instance, we have over 50 projects that are active or have been proposed within DCM and ACM Share. Next slide. Rigor. We have, from the get-go, been very explicit about how we measure things, how we define things, and we have a process for identifying data entry errors and missingness. So we're really trying to build a scientific repository that's robust with conclusions that we all can trust. Next slide. Support. Share is not free. We've been very fortunate to work with both institutional and corporate sponsors to underwrite the cost of Share. And what that allows us to do is to pay sites to have site personnel do data entry to make sure the data are clean, to work with a great statistician, Brian Claggett, to help support the site investigators, and to build the database. Next slide. We know that even with 8,000 patients worth of data, we may not have enough information in Share, but we want to collaborate with others, and we've already done that. So we can either validate findings that we made or collaborate with colleagues elsewhere in the world if the numbers aren't big enough. So for instance, we are collaborating with Dr. Garcia Pavia in Madrid in the next generation of BAG3 studies, knowing that we really need to get together at scale to better understand that disease. Next slide. It's secure, so this really has gone through the strictest, most 2026 versions of data security. So if you know about the GDPR standards, and I'm sure you've heard about HIPAA compliance, we've really gone out of our way to maintain high standards of security. So patients who participate and consent to participate and Share can be confident that their information is not going to be betrayed. Next slide. Implicit in its name is that this is a collaborative effort. This is really to try to get away from one scientist, one clinician scientist driving everything, but really to work together as a community to advance science. And that includes not just research questions, but also training the next generation of clinician investigators or academic physicians. And so we try to pair senior investigators at one site with junior investigators at another site and really try to foster more international collaboration. Next slide. It's patient engaged. We've involved patients in some of the fields that we've developed, in some of the instruments we've used, and in some of the grants where we've partnered with patients and collaborated with the DCM Foundation, for instance, and future studies that would utilize Share. Next slide. I showed you a slide or several slides of the investigators, but I really think it's an all-star cast of thought leaders in the field. And so by bringing everyone together, really hopeful that we can put a lot of wisdom and knowledge into next future discoveries. And next slide. We're very future-oriented. We recognize that the world is changing very rapidly, and we're working to set up an infrastructure to utilize AI and machine learning to do things that we can't do, like sophisticated reanalysis of MRI images at scale, or ECG, for instance, and that's very much a priority. Next slide. So I'm going to pass it on to Greg Ruff.
Thanks, Neal, so much for taking the time in your really busy schedule to be with us this evening. And then also thank you for all the great work that you do. Thanks to Nikki for putting the webinar on, and Justine for your behind the scenes work. Thanks to everybody for attending today. So let's talk a little bit about clinical trials. The details today are for information purposes only. We have QR codes on each of the slides that which is an overview of the clinical trial, to clinicaltrials.gov that will give you complete information. Many of the trial sponsors mentioned are past or present sponsors of the DCM Foundation. In general, and I was peeking at the questions as Neal was talking. Someone asked about being able to participate in clinical trials, even though their medical center wasn't participating. One of the things that's being encouraged, especially with gene therapy, or really all clinical trials, is what we're working on is direct-to-patient recruitment. So yes, I think every clinical trial will be able to take patients that aren't associated with the academic medical centers where they're conducting the clinical trial. And we'll have information on how you can find that out. So it's really, really important that I think people all over the country that are interested participate in these. The participation is voluntary, and in general, they pay for travel expenses. Check the details for every clinical trial that you look at, but in general, they will pay for your expenses, any out-of-pocket expenses you may incur for travel. The details are subject to change. And again, I am not a medical doctor. I'm providing this information to you as a patient organization representative. Next slide, please. So clinical trial basics. Clinical trials are designed to look at the safety and effectiveness of new treatments, providing essential data for regulatory approval. The trials are in separate phases, and we'll talk a little bit about that the next slide. But gene therapy clinical trials require hospitalization for some of the gene therapy treatment, and this allows close monitoring, as you're getting the treatment by medical professionals. And they're also, as outlined by FDA, in clinical trials, there's also long-term follow-up as researchers can continue to assess the treatment, long-term effects, and continued safetiness and effectiveness. Justine, next slide, please. When we generally look at this, there are four basic phases to a trial. One is, looking at the safety of the trial. Phase two is it looks at does it actually work? Phase three is the large-scale confirmation of the effectiveness. And then phase 4, as I discussed before, is post-approval after they've approved the drug for monitoring. In a lot of the therapies we're looking at next are gene therapy clinical trials, and a lot of the gene therapy clinical trials are much smaller, and they often combine phases 1 and 2. Next slide, please. So, one, I'd like to say how tremendously exciting it is to be sitting here as the co-founder and executive director of the DCM Foundation, and to say that in 2026, there will be 7 and maybe more clinical trials that DCM patients could actually, be eligible for. I wouldn't have dreamed that there would be this many this quickly. And for those that there aren't clinical trials that you may be eligible for, there will be many more coming. There are 30 some companies with genetic cardiomyopathy pipelines and over 80 therapies under development. That doesn't mean all of them will come to clinical trial, but it's very, very exciting of what's happening here. And we very much thank the investors investing in these companies, the researchers putting time into developing these therapies, and the staff of the gene therapy companies that are working hard to create solutions for you and I as patients and family members. We'll go into more detail about each clinical trial next. Next slide, please. The first slide that we're going to talk about, the first clinical trial, first slide here is the kinship DCM, which is the drug name is danicamtiv. And it's by, if you look at the bottom right, a company called Cardigan. It is an interventional drug therapy. So this is actually you take a pill. This is a larger clinical trial where you would have 50% of the people taking the actual drug therapy and 50% with placebo. And the targets for this clinical trial are really anyone with a genetic DCM variant. And they specifically are targeting and recruiting heavily MYH7 and TTN or Titan variants, people with the Titan variant. Again, and I'm going to give you the general criteria. It is currently recruiting, as you can see at the top right of the screen. The barcode at the bottom right, it actually has the link to the actual information, but general information, they're looking for 18 years or older, confirmed diagnosis of genetic or familiar DCM, DCM systems that affect your day-to-day life. And again, you can either go to clinicaltrials.gov or you can go to the barcode below, click on it, it'll actually go to the page study that has more details. And this is basically in phase 2, phase 3 right now. So we appreciate the folks of Cardigan putting together potential drug therapy that we hope to help DCM patients. Next slide, please. The next study we have is a Coro heart study from Proleo, and it is an observational study. So this is a study where you actually would do 100% of the study from your home. They actually send you materials and patches and things that you can do to actually monitor your heart. There are no drugs involved. There's no hospital visits or anything like that. They're really looking for folks. It's a very large study also, currently recruiting, looking for all types of cardiovascular patients, really zeroing in on 18 years or older, cardiovascular disease such as heart failure, hypertension, hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, dilated cardiomyopathy, and aortic stenosis. And again, to get more money on the actual page that talks about this clinical trial from Proleo of the heart study, click on the bottom right-hand code, and it'll take you and get more information. Again, thanking the Proleo people for their interest in our community and helping us. Next slide, please. The next slide, we're going to see that there are actually 3 BAG3 clinical trials happening in 2026. And the first one is by Rocket Pharmaceuticals, the RP-A710701 gene therapy for clinical trial. It is an interventional gene therapy. It is in phase 1, and I think probably also phase 1, phase 2 combined. We talked about a gene therapy. They're smaller actual clinical trials. There's no placebo. Everybody is dosed with the drug therapy. It tends to be an intravenous drug given to you. The type of people that they're actually looking for, obviously, BAG3 people that have been diagnosed with a pathogenic or likely pathogenic variant. It is not yet recruiting, but will be soon. The main criteria, 18 to 65, a pathogenic or likely pathogenic variant of BAG3, a clinical diagnosis of DCM, an implantable ICD, and the barcode there actually goes to clinicaltrials.gov. And I know Rocket will have a page describing all of the details about this in a patient-centric form, probably in the next 30 days or so. Next slide, please. A second gene therapy that is actually recruiting for BAG3 patients is the Upbeat AFTX 201 from the folks at Affinia Therapeutics. Again, it is an interventional gene therapy. They're targeting for their clinical trial people with a truncating BAG3 gene mutation. The vast majority of people with BAG3 mutation have a truncating BAG3 mutation. It is also not yet recruiting, but their main criteria are 18 to 55 years at the time of enrollment, truncating BAG3 gene mutation, NYH class 2 or 3. And if you don't know what that is, actually just go to Google and be able to put that, what it includes. It's basically you're kind of sick or pretty sick, but you do have symptoms, but it's not real severe yet. They're looking for people with a left or ejection fraction of left ventricle, ejection fraction of less than 45%. Again, additional requirements for study. And click on the barcode below or take a picture of it, and it'll take you to the clinicaltrial.gov. But it's not recruiting yet, but we're recruiting a little bit later in the year. Next slide, please. The next is the DCM Restore, or ALXN2350 from Alexion. Very similar BAG3 gene mutation interventional therapy, phase 1, phase 2. It is recruiting. And you can actually go to that information about the clinical trial on the barcode bottom right. Their main criteria are 18 to 70 years of enrollment, pathogenic or likely pathogenic mutation of BAG3, medical history of diagnosis of dilated cardiomyopathy. And again, as all these additional requirements will apply. Next slide. The last one we have is coming up is for Lamin A, Frontier DCM NVC 001A from Nueva Core, phase 1, phase 2, targeting Lamin A mutation. Exact details undisclosed this time, but the general information that we've been able to gather is it's 18 years or older, mutation of Lamin A, gene causing Lamin A DCM, NYH class 1, 2, or 3, LVEF between 25 and 45%, ICD implanted. It's not yet recruiting, and to get, you'll see something a bit later this year with information around this clinical trial. Next slide, please. The last clinical trial it's active. It kind of finished up their recruiting for now. It may become active again soon, but the GeneFit AB1002 by AskBio. It's an interventional gene therapy. They're looking for chronic non-ischemic cardiomyopathy, 18 years or older, chronic non-ischemic cardiomyopathy, NYH class 3 heart failure symptoms with an EF of 15 to 35%. And to actually go to the site page that describes this, click on or take a picture of the barcode at the bottom. Next slide. That's all we have there. So thank you very much for attending tonight, and we'll go to questions. And I think I will run the Q&A, if that's okay. Neal, if you'd like to pop on for this, that would be great. Thank you. Perfect. First question, is there any research, Neal, most of these will be for you. I'll take the easy ones. Is there any research exploring comorbidity between DCM and hypermobility syndrome, such as Ehlers-Danlos and/or automatic nervous system disorders, including POTS?
I think that probably there's not a known connection, at least that I know of, with that. I think autonomic dysfunction, so this is the part of your nervous system that controls things like your blood pressure and your heart rate, can be impact. If you have that and you're being treated for DCM, it can be complicated to use some of the medicines that are vital. But I'm not aware of an overlap there. It just may be two conditions can unfortunately occur independently in the same person.
Perfect. Thank you. Any advice on how to provide evidence to insurance companies to support long-term disability? The cardiologists they employ have no experience with lamin A.
It's a tougher one. I think it really is specific to the person. And, with lamin-related heart disease, often patients have associated skeletal muscle problems. And so knowing whether or not that's a factor, some of the other decisions are actually going to live a little bit more in the world of heart failure. So if you have heart failure, there's actually a pretty robust way of characterizing disease severity that is often used in the process of a disability claim. But it's not something that I think it would be as connected with the genetic cause as it is the severity of the disease related to the genetic cause.
Great, thank you. The one thing we always recommend is if you can get to an academic medical center that has experience with genetic cardiomyopathy, be seen by them. I think they could probably provide better support. Also, if you're happy to feel free to reach out to info at dcmfoundation.org, and we're happy to try to help you. So here's Glenn, 82, idiopathic dilated cardiomyopathy, 2017. Too old.
So I think the question is, if he had genetic testing in 2017 for DCM, should he be retested?
Yes.
It depends on what the panel was. And so for dilated cardiomyopathy, we recognize that many different disease genes can be involved. And so the usual approach is to do a panel of genes, not a single gene. By 2017, most labs were using panels that were very, very comprehensive. And so if that was really done, and here, I'm sorry, it was even more recently than that, 3 to 4 years ago, I think it's unlikely that repeating testing today adds to it or would be clinically useful.
Great.
The next question is, where do the RBM20 specific guidelines for ICD live? They don't. This is a great question. This is something that the European guidelines in 2023 included specific disease genes as being associated with a higher risk of arrhythmia, so that providers should look out for whether or not a defibrillator should be used early. That list is growing, or the list of genes that should be included in that are growing. Some of the nuanced decisions around RBM20 don't live there, like which regions of the gene are more high risk. And I think there, especially with the disease gene like RBM20, you want to see, I would recommend seeing a cardiologist that has experience with genetic heart disease.
Very good. Thank you. Question is, testing for the following genes available: ACTN2, CP2, RS258415 at chromosome, GNB. Yeah. So basically, are these cardiomyopathy genes, Neal, or is there a mixed bag there?
I think it's a mixed bag. Actin can be a cardiomyopathy gene. Some of these are transporter genes. I think the chromosome region that is listed there is it's a region. You don't necessarily have genetic testing in clinical practice for that. That's something that might turn up through research testing. And then, Greg, maybe in the interest of time, because I'm sad that
You're
our
rolling, you
webinar will
got to
be ending
go.
soon. I might get to questions that I can answer a little bit more directly. And
Perfect.
please,
Perfect.
my apologies to everyone who I don't get to.
No, so yeah. So one, I want to go through how do you get your chances, increase your chance to get into a clinical trial. Again, I think, we'll be listing, I think, the clinical trials that you saw today on our website. And, if you meet the criteria, that's great. We hope that we can do a lot of direct-to-patient recruitment outside of people that actually attend those academic medical centers. So.
Yeah, and to be very explicit, these trials are not going to be successful if recruitment only occurs at the sites where the that academic cardiologist lives. So I'm involved in almost all of these trials. We would not be able to enroll them successfully unless patients who are further away give us a call and say, I want to be in this study. And that's what's happened so far in other early stage gene therapy trials. So clinicaltrials.gov is really the place to start. It's going to include the contact information for the sites if you want to participate in a trial and find out if you're eligible for them. And I would say for some of these, and Greg, you showed it, the trials are not open yet, and so they may not have a clinicaltrials.gov presence yet. And so don't despair if you don't see it on clinicaltrials.gov. That just means that nobody's recruiting yet.
Great. I want to take this one, Neal, and if we don't get to your questions, guys, we'll answer them after the fact. But we're in the interest of time, we won't get to all the questions. But a question for me from an anonymous attendee: if you qualify for clinical trial gene therapy, would you consider participating? I think that's a great question. I had a heart transplant. I'm a laminate guy. Certainly, I would if I hadn't had a heart transplant and would be eligible. I started the DCM Foundation and GCAC as a way to help patients, as a way to help spur therapies. We're at a point where there are a lot of potential therapies coming, which I think are great. And, I personally look at it as my duty to, if there were any clinical trial that I might be eligible for, I may not participate, but I think we owe it to ourselves, our family members, and our community members to take a hard look at it. It's participating in a clinical trial is always a personal decision. And in the end, it may be yes or maybe no. But I think as patients, in order to help the community and help the therapy developers, we do want to we should at least explore and get all the information and then make a very informed decision. Neal, anything else to add to that?
No, I think you said it perfectly, Greg. I think you are going to be at the front of you're going to be at the frontier of this. And I can tell you as a principal investigator, as a doctor participating or leading in these trials, I absolutely do not want to twist anybody's arm into participating in them. It's a huge commitment, especially the gene therapy trials. And what I would recommend is that you have a conversation with the research team before you make a final decision about whether you want to participate. So don't just read the consent form and say, I'm ready to go. Talk to them, understand what the ask is. What is the time commitment? What are the risks? What are the study procedures? So you know what you're involved in. Obviously, we're not going to figure out if these things work without people who are going to be very generous with themselves and with their time. And so we want people to participate, but ask a lot of questions.
Yeah, and get expert advice. We're working on actually having very well-trained patient advocates answer questions to do that. We've got a couple of minutes. There's one that I would, and we can't give medical advice. A lot of these are sort of, hey, give me a diagnosis or what do I do? We can't do that online, unfortunately. But here's what: I'm living in South Africa with the laminate, basically 335. My doctors are quite perplexed. What's going on? Is there a website information sharing portal they can go to look at other people? So there's laminatecardiac.org. I would reach out to that group. They have probably 1,000 laminate patients. One of the co-founders is Roger Veltropa, is a laminate transplant patient. He's one of the top researchers on laminate. So go to laminatecardiac.org. I think that could help. And Neal, last question or two, is there anything that you see that you would like to answer?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of great questions about specific medical challenges, or I completely get it. You're looking for an expert. You have really thoughtful questions. I think, Greg, you mentioned LMNA cardiac. I think GCAC and the DCM Foundation can be a useful resource. And sometimes it is a journey, but I would strongly recommend working with the DCM Foundation to maybe get some suggestions of where to go next in looking for a provider or a doctor who knows this field.
Great. And there's a few questions here that about, clinical trials coming, where to get information. Again, stay tuned to us with all the clinical trials mentioned, and probably any clinical trial in this area we'll have information on. So feel free to reach out to either the GCAC, info@geneticcardiomyopathy.org, or info@dcmfoundation.org, and we're happy to share information with you on clinical trials. So
yeah, and I'd say there's more coming. So I know a lot of people wondered they didn't see their gene there, but rest assured, there's a lot coming.
Yeah, great. I think we'll have to wrap up. Neal, I know that you've got many things going. We appreciate your time very much. Again, thanks, Nikki. Thanks, Justine. And thanks, everyone, for attending. We'll get to your questions after the fact, the ones that we can answer, and get them back to you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all. We certainly want to thank all of our sponsors whose logos you see on the screen. Their support allows us to present this important information. And thank you again to all of the patient partner groups for their ongoing support. Next slide. As stated earlier, registrants will receive an email with a recording of tonight's webinar. That email will also include links to the DCM Share Project, and it will include links to the clinical trials that we discussed tonight. So if you weren't able to scan those QR codes, don't worry, just check your email and we'll include the links to those as well. Next slide. I would like to remind you to please register for our next webinar to be held April 15th, where Rocket Pharmaceuticals will provide an overview of natural history and gene therapy clinical studies for BAG3, dilated cardiomyopathy. Registration is open and information can be found on the DCM Foundation and GCAC websites. Remember that even if you can't attend live, just register and you'll receive a copy of the recording via email. And one final slide. Thank you. Thank you all for spending your time with us this evening. We hope that tonight's discussion helped deepen your understanding of genetic DCM, the importance of genetic testing, and the promising research efforts underway. Initiatives like the DCM Share Project and upcoming clinical trials are only possible because of engaged and informed communities like this one. Have a wonderful evening. Be well, and we'll see you soon.